Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today to talk a little bit about customer experience. My name is Julian Rio. I am Senior Marketing Director for RingCentral. I'm also a certified customer experience professional with a strong passion for everything related to customer experience. So what is it that we're going to discuss today? We're going to talk about customer experience specifically, but a subset of customer experience, that is customer engagement, that is incredibly crucial to successful customer experience. And in that specific topic, we're also going to touch everything around cold deflection, what it is, why is it important, and what can you expect from it. So why are we going to talk about cold deflection, and how does it concern anything about customer experience and customer engagement? Well, even though I do assume you are a contact center professional, maybe a customer experience professional yourself, we are all customers here. We are all consumers, and we all spend time on the phone dealing with brands. Now, regardless of all the efforts that brands are paying to satisfy their customers, needless to say, most of the time, when you do have an experience with a hotline, it usually brings frustration. And there are so many reasons out there why phone calls might lead to frustration. There's waiting time, there is complexity, there is the maze that typical IVRs can represent. There are so many reasons out there. Now, let's be clear about something. Calls are important. Phone still remains one of the main channels when it comes to customer support and customer engagement, and it's not going to change anytime soon. I mean, phone calls are still going to remain an important part of customer engagement for the years to come. So the real question here is to find out what can we do about it to improve the customer experience without trying to suppress calls altogether, but just to improve the overall experience that comes with it. And to get started on this topic, I'd like to bring up the customer experience pyramid, as many of you probably have seen already. When it comes to customer experience, there's really 3 layers you need to consider. And while most of the articles and webinars you can see online around customer experience are usually talking about how to make a customer experience enjoyable, how to delight your customers, how to have an outstanding customer experience. The truth is, before you can get there, you first need to get this one fixed. So the customer experience pyramid is working in the same way as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is basically you need to fix the first layer before moving on to the next one, and so on. So the first layer of the customer experience pyramid is about meeting needs. And that's something that most contact centers already figured out a long time ago. There is no surprise here. It's basically, I need to answer my customers' questions or fix my customers' problems. Basically, they're reaching out to me for a specific reason. I just need to make sure that by the end of the conversation, whatever they needed is now fulfilled. And that is something that usually happens pretty well. But once this is done, you can move on to the second layer, and that's usually where frustration begins. There is a very simple metric you can track to know whether you're doing a good job on this second layer of the pyramid, which is the CS, the Customer Effort Score. Basically, how difficult is it, or how easy is it to engage with your brand? And that covers absolutely every aspect of customer engagement. That starts with, how easy is it to find your contact information? Do I need to scroll the entire website to find a phone number or a web form or whatever other channel? Then how long do I need to wait on the line? How complex is the IVR? How many transfers do I get? Do I have any risk of people hanging up on me? Do I need to send multiple follow-up emails before anyone actually answer my initial questions, and so on? Everything about how easy it is to deal with your brand fits in that layer. And only once you got this one fixed can you start looking at the next layer of the pyramid, which is how enjoyable the entire experience is going to be. And that's precisely what we're going to focus on today, because I'm convinced that you already know how to meet your customers' needs. I'm convinced that you already want to provide an enjoyable customer experience, but how do you make it easier? And what's very interesting about this layer, and that's where cold deflection is going to come in, is that when you make the experience easier, it's not only easier for the customer, it's often very much easier for the contact center people, the agents and the managers as well, and it's a win-win situation when done properly. So before getting into it, let me just share just a couple of stats that will set the background, set the context for that discussion. The first statistics is that 75% of customers believe it takes too long to reach a live agent. And here, if you just look at your personal experience dealing with, could be your phone provider, your electricity provider, your water provider, your insurance, your bank, chances are that 3 times out of 4 you feel like it's taking way too long to be able to engage with a customer service representative. And that's actually what statistics show. Most of the time, we find it's too long. Now, the definition of too long might be different from one customer to another. Some of us get frustrated after 30 seconds waiting on the line. Some of us are willing to wait over 10 minutes. But overall, 3 phone calls out of 4 are considered to take too long. Now, most interestingly, is not just to know whether people find it's too long or too short. What's interesting is how important is it in their overall customer experience. And 73% of clients find that waiting time is a main frustration when calling support. So why is that so important? Well, it's important because if you can fix that specific piece of customer experience, of customer engagement, that is waiting time, if you can get this fixed, you're going to fix the main frustration for 73% of your customers. So it's a pretty big milestone to reach here, and not necessarily a very difficult one to attain. So let's go back to the basics. Why call is so important nowadays? Why so many people are actually calling your customer service team? Why is your contact center so important? But why is your call center so important? Calls are actually engraved in our DNA because it has been decades that companies tell us when you have a problem, you can reach out to us by phone calls. And that has always been more convenient than anything else because the alternative was to write a letter or to actually move to a local store. So it felt so much easier for many years to just pick up the phone. And that's why so many people are now picking up the phone. On top of that, on top of being part of our daily habits and DNA, calls has this ability to share emotions that often disappear when you have a digital conversation. But maybe the main reason why so many people are still calling today is simply because that's the first thing you find. When you go on Google and you type your brand name followed by customer service, chances are the first thing that's going to pop up is actually your contact center phone number. And because of this, because you can control what's happening on Google, many people are still calling because that's the easiest thing for them to find, the easiest way for them to engage with your brand. Now, saying that you can control Google is probably a big statement because Google is actually giving us more and more tools to better control that experience. I'm, for example, thinking about Google My Business, or more recently Google Business Messages, which are 2 different tools that help you better control this customer experience. But still, overall, most people will find your phone number to be the easiest, the most reachable way to engage with your brand. So if people are engaging through phone, what is typically happening? Well, the most typical flow is the customer calls, it goes through an IVR, and this IVR, which was built in the 80s with the best intention in mind of making customer experience simpler and making customers' lives easier, as well as simplifying the contact center workflow, usually turn into something terrible because it was not tested enough or because it was not maintained or refreshed sufficiently often. And very often, as a customer, we find it very frustrating to talk to an IVR because this decision tree, if it doesn't fit exactly the need that you have, turns out to be very disappointing for many customers. But assuming the IVR works, what happens next is that you go on hold and you're going to wait for the next available agent to pick up your call. That is best case scenario. Worst case scenario that happens very often as well is because you've been waiting for a certain period of time and there's still no agent available, then the line is just going to cut and you're going to have as a customer to go back to stage one and go through the typical flow again. This is because of this simple flow that most of the phone experiences that your customers have may turn out to be frustrating and be one of the major frustration source that they may recall. So what is cold deflection in all this, and why is it important? Well, the basic definition here is that cold deflection is a way to move from a simple phone conversation to a digital conversation that could actually provide new benefits for both the customer and the contact center. But before getting into cold deflection, how it works and how to set it up, the first question you need to ask yourself is why? Why should you be looking at cold deflection? What are the main advantages, the main reasons for going with cold deflection? And to answer this question, I think we need to figure out the difference between two terms that many companies tend to mix up because they mean very different things. Those two terms are cold deflection and cold avoidance, because they are two very different things. When you do cold avoidance, you're basically looking at a company that considers the contact center as a cost center, meaning that they will try to avoid calls and avoid customer engagement in general at all costs, because each interaction with a customer is considered to be a fixed cost that needs to be avoided anytime possible. The problem with cold avoidance is you're not trying to improve the customer experience. You're simply looking at the financial bottom line, trying to reduce the cost in general. Cold deflection is not that. Cold deflection is about giving customers options, giving customers the choice to move to something that would be beneficial for him as a customer, improving the overall customer experience, while in the same time helping the contact center get better flow and reduce costs as well. But the major difference here is that when it comes to cold deflection, you are not trying to avoid engagement, you are embracing engagement, you are even encouraging your customers to engage even further, but just according to better rules that will be beneficial to everyone. So while in cold avoidance, you do everything you can to reduce the number of calls, in cold deflection, you do everything you can to continue engaging with your customers just in a better way that is not necessarily a call. So what would be the benefits of cold deflection? The first benefit is about enhanced customer experience, and that's probably the most important one here, meaning that as soon as you start embracing cold deflection, you're going to reduce the waiting time and therefore mechanically increase customer satisfaction. You're also going to be able to continue managing complex interactions over the phone when necessary, but for some specific interaction that would be easier through digital channels, and here I'm thinking about things like making a payment, signing a document, downloading my latest invoice, changing my password, giving my billing address, all this kind of thing that are usually very complex to do over the phone and can be misleading or lead to spelling errors, for example. All these things that are much easier through digital, you're not going to be able to move them to digital channels and make both your customer and your agent's lives easier. That also enables you to provide services outside working hours, because the biggest difficulty with phone conversation is that it is synchronous, meaning that you need both sides to be connected in the same time, which is why it leads so often to long waiting queue on the hotline. Now, moving to digital channels, you're going to be able to turn this into asynchronous conversations, meaning that you could potentially be available for your customers 24/7. Last but not least, digital conversations are usually benefiting from a much better customer overview with a 360 view of historical conversation, historical transactions, so that the agent has a full background information before responding to a customer. So now, in a very concrete way, when do you do cold deflection? There are really three different stages for a company to consider cold deflection. Usually, when we talk about cold deflection, people think about the second one, which is with the IVR, meaning that you are on the IVR and the IVR is going to detect that it might be better to move to digital channel, and therefore is going to offer alternatives to the customer. But cold deflection really happens in three different stages. It happens before the call, where you don't need any technical background or any complex solution to set up. It can be something as easy as letting the customer know that there are alternatives to call, because many customers probably don't even want to call a phone number. They would probably prefer to message your brand, but for them to do so, they need to be aware that it's feasible. So the first layer of cold deflection is just making sure it is clear for customers what solutions are available for them to engage with your brand. Then you get the Ivr redirection, and then the third one is actually about redirecting customers during the call itself. And that could be after fixing part of the problem with the customer on the phone, the agent might find out that for processing the payment or signing any document or downloading some additional documents, it might be easier to continue this conversation over digital channels, simply because you can send them a link or a document directly, something that you could not do over the phone. So there are these three different layers of cold deflections, and often you can mix 2-3 of them or just start with a single one. But cold deflection is not just a technical solution. That's really a mindset for improving customer experience while actually simplifying the flows within your contact center. Let me give you an example of before the call kind of deflection. This is a screenshot I took from one of RingCentral's customers' support contact page. And that's a fantastic way for doing cold deflection, meaning just making it obvious to customers how easy it is to engage with the brand on multiple digital channels. You still have all the information you need about the hotline, the phone number, and how to engage with the brand over phone channel. But now you have all these different alternatives that actually come first, and not somewhere buried at the bottom of the website or the footer. It's actually in plain sight here, making it super obvious how easy and how convenient. And because you have so many options, there must be something that's convenient for everyone. You might be a WhatsApp user or Apple iMessage user or maybe a Facebook Messenger user. There is something for everyone. And if none of these solutions work for you, well, the hotline is still available and is not going to disappear anytime soon, but at least you're aware of all the different alternatives you got. So what does cold deflection look like from an IVR perspective? Well, the flow changes a little bit. The first thing is that you still have the customer calling, and you're still calling through an IVR that's going to detect what you want and what is the best path for you to go through. But this IVR is not going to do a little more than just this. It's going to try to figure out whether this customer is fitting specific criteria. And the criteria can be very simple things, such as, is it a mobile number calling me? Because if it's a mobile number, chances are we can do cold deflection. The second thing could be the issue that the customer is facing. Is it an issue that's easy to manage through digital channels or not? And there could be a third layer that could be about waiting time, for example. Like, is there more or less than a minute waiting time? If there is less, let the customer wait for a minute. That doesn't hurt. But if it's more than a minute, maybe we can offer alternatives. The IVR is now going to look through the different criteria that you've selected, that you've identified, and then offer, and I insist on the word offer because the option is always with the customer to make its own decision. The IVR is going to offer either you wait on the line by stating very clear expectations on how much time you should be waiting if you decide to go with this option, or do you prefer to move on to the second line, which is deflection to digital channel? And now that's for the customer to pick which decision makes more sense for him. And why that is so important is because you don't build frustration when you let customers decide on their own. Now, those people who decided that they don't want to go to digital because they absolutely want to talk to someone, and that might be a legit request based on the complexity of the specificity of the issue they are facing. But those people who decide to stay on the left and wait a little longer to talk to an agent, they will probably have to wait less in the end because other people have left the waiting line, and therefore the agents will be available for the first category of people faster. So by offering this deflection to just some of your customers, you have mechanically reduced the volume of calls that you have to manage, and therefore you've sped up the ability for customers to actually engage with an agent. So the next question would be, where do we start? In CX, we tend to say, don't try to boil the ocean because you can't do everything in the same time. You're going to have to start somewhere. And the best way to start is to get a quick win, to get something that has a great value for the company, but with as little effort as possible so that you can show the value of the project that you're leading. So same thing applies to cold deflection specifically. So where to start? I suggest you look at two different pools of data. The first pool is about the main category of calls. So what you're going to have to do is to check all the calls that you receive on a monthly basis and try to rank the categories that you have by volume. Meaning, maybe the first category is the largest number of calls you receive are about, I forgot my password. And second is where to find my invoice. And third is, I have an issue with my letters bill. Maybe the fourth one is, I have a technical problem, and so on and so forth. Just list and rank the different categories of calls that you receive on a monthly basis so that you know exactly what are the top pain points that your customers are calling for. The second pool of data that you want to look at is the easiest categories of issues that you can manage through digital channels. What I mean by that is there are some problems that are so much easier to manage through digital. For example, where to find my latest invoice. You can send customer a direct link, or you can even send them the PDF of their latest bill directly through whatever digital channel, which would be much more difficult to do through the phone. Same thing for payments, same thing for entering their name, phone number, address, and so on. Much easier if they can type it on digital channels than if you have to try to ask them to spell it over the phone. So same thing here. Try to list and rank the topics, the categories of issues that your customers have based on how easy or how easier that would be through digital channels. And where to start with cold deflection? Well, it's basically the intersection of the two. You're going to start by focusing on those categories that have high volume of calls and would be easier managed on digital channels. And once you got this top 1, 2, or 3, and you start deflecting those specific categories to digital channels, you're going to reduce by a lot the volume of calls you receive, simply because they are part of your main categories of calls. But also you're going to satisfy your customers because those topics are typical topics that would be so much better managed through digital channels. Now, taking this approach is exactly what AXA Switzerland has been doing for a while. Working with RingCentral, AXA Switzerland has set up cold deflection, starting by a few categories only that fits exactly the criteria we mentioned earlier. And the reason why they've done this is because they understand that digital interactions are the future. Now, it's still embedded in our DNA is that call is the first thing we try to do because that's what we've been used to do for the past few decades. But what's happening is that when customers see that digital channels are available, are easy to engage through, and are fixing their problem without them holding the line for too long, then these habits are slowly changing. So what AXA has been doing is offering cold deflection just for a few categories to start with, and they've seen that it shortens the waiting time for their customers. It makes activity management from a contact center perspective much easier, but it also reduces the cost of customer service because digital channels are typically cheaper to manage than phone calls. Now, just a few stats to share with you. just with a few categories they've started with, because they just started to deploy this approach, they already deflect over 1,000 calls each month, which, considering that each call represents some money for the contact center, it's a great win for the contact center. Already 5% of the customers calling to get documents now choose digital. So the change of habits is starting already, and over time, this number is going to grow organically. And the growth for digital conversation since this approach is gigantic, 250% growth of digital conversation already. So why am I sharing all this with you? Simply because this is really the way to go. We are not about replacing calls, because calls are still a really important part of customer service, of customer engagement, and of customer experience, generally speaking. But offering the choice to customers is essential. Now, what we've not covered today, but that is equally important, is it's not just about sending customers from call to digital, but it's also about managing those digital conversations as efficiently as possible, meaning that if you redirect your customers to a channel that you don't manage quite well, it could lead to some new issues. This is specifically our strength at RingCentral. We help customers better manage phone calls, but also better manage digital conversation. So please feel free to visit ringcentral.co.uk to find out more about what we do with our customers and how we can help with cold deflection. And let us help you improve customer experience in general while saving cost within your contact center. Thank you everyone for listening to this session. I invite you to visit that website, reach out to me on LinkedIn directly if you want to continue that conversation, and I wish you all have a lovely day. Thank you, everyone.